Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'd like to thank Superintendent Brown and Civilian Office of Police Accountability Chief Administrator Sydney Roberts. We've all been putting in long hours over the last few days, and especially them. We wanted to be here today to make sure that we reinforce for everyone in our city that we have not wavered, we will never waver on the road to police reform and accountability. And Chicago's road to reform started really more than 4 years ago when I was the president of the Police Accountability Task Force following the righteous outcry over the video which revealed the killing of Laquan McDonald. And before I became mayor, my job was to hold police accountable for their misconduct and to use my voice and my seat at the table to push for needed reforms. And since I've become mayor, we've really been doubling down on this work. The death of George Floyd, since that time, our commitment to ensuring reform is a top priority. And that has only been reinforced in the urgency of this moment. That's why on Tuesday night, I announced a list of reform measures, some of which were part of the consent decree process, but I want to accelerate them because we need them now more than ever. These measures build on not only the recommendations of the Police Accountability Task Force, but those in the consent decree as well. To implement these reforms within 90 days might be a tough task, but it's a necessary one, and I'm going to hold all of us accountable for that. These include bringing the community into the police academy as teachers. This is something that we've been talking about for a long time, and we need to do it and get it done right. Providing district training on neighborhood history from the community's own perspective. No officer should be going into a new district without understanding the rich history and complexity of those neighborhoods, not just the crime statistics. We need to expand programs that include youth-led neighborhood exposure and education, like we've seen with My Block, My Hood, My City, that leads just these kinds of tours. But we also need to make sure that we're supporting our officers. It goes without saying that hurt people hurt people. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we get done quickly and we get done right is improving officer wellness. Such as finally implementing our officer support system and early intervention pilot, improving our peer support program and ensuring we connect counselors to officers in need, as well as mandating crisis intervention and procedural justice training for every officer, delivering additional de-escalation tools for officers and community members to use, and undergoing a new recruit program on police community relations and community policing. But Tuesday's call to action was simply the latest in a series of ongoing reforms that have been undergoing for quite some time, and especially over the last 12 months. We are under consent decree, and we have very specific court-mandated obligations, and we will meet those obligations. To CPD partnering with community organizations on evaluating department policies, to CPD holding community conversations on how they can better access and do better across the board and bring the community into those communications as trusted partners. All of these things with the goal of building bridges and authentic relationships between our police officers and the community, and serving the public is our responsibility as public servants. These last few days have been incredibly challenging for our city, and that's a supreme understatement. It's been hard, it's been painful, it's been hurtful. But what I know is that our residents who are in pain are also remaining hopeful. They are crying out for us to act and to heed their cry, and we will do that. We will not ignore the pain and the trauma that our residents are facing. And through it all, we need to make sure that our men and women of the police department who've been working round the clock, we need to make sure that we appreciate the vast majority of those who have been doing their job the right way but I want to be very clear. We will hold people accountable who cross the line. And I'm aware of reports of misconduct, and Sydney will talk more about it, but those will not be tolerated, and they will be aggressively investigated. And Sydney and her team are going to call balls and strikes, no curveballs. They're going to follow the facts, and they're going to make the necessary recommendations, whatever the facts dictate. We will investigate every case and get to the bottom of every case, and we will not spare any resource to do so. And I call upon members of the public again, if you believe that you've been mistreated by the police, you must file a complaint. Please call COPA now by dialing 311, and Chief Administrator Roberts and her team stand ready to take your complaint. Even though this has been a very difficult and challenging time in our city, we cannot and we will not abandon our values. And that especially includes our values and determination around police reform and accountability. This is fundamental to who we are as a city. Now is the time for us to accelerate our training around constitutional policing and commit to an understanding that respectful constitutional engagement with the people we are sworn to serve is the most powerful tool that we have. And I believe in my heart that the vast majority of police officers understand it and embrace it. But as I said, if someone crosses the line, no question, we will hold them accountable. Now, COPA is prepared for an increase in the volume of complaints, and as Director Roberts will detail, they are working to investigate every case as quickly as possible. But I want to caution everyone, and particularly those who are using social media and reading and consuming social media. You got to do your diligence, folks. You can't just accept at face value everything that you see. And that includes videos. Now, we've seen some videos out there that are deeply disturbing, no question about it. But give COPA and IAD the opportunity to fully investigate, to understand the context, and then to transparently report what the findings of the investigations find. Just as one protester breaking into the store does not reflect the thousands of other peaceful protesters, so too does one video not determine the entirety of 13,400 sworn police officers. So let's give the investigators the opportunity and space they need to do their jobs before we reach a judgment. But if there is someone that needs to be held accountable, we won't shy away from doing that. Now I'm going to welcome COPA Administrator Sydney Roberts up here in a moment, but I want to finish by adding that police reform isn't the only thing that's going to transform and uplift our communities. I made a commitment at the time that I was sworn in that we were going to invest in neighborhoods that lacked economic development and resources for decades. My commitment that I made a year ago in front of the entire city is no less now. In fact, it's even more determined to make sure that we bring resources to these communities, particularly those that have been very hard hit over the last few days. This is precisely why we created initiatives like Invest Southwest, why we updated the ability to fund small businesses through the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, and other things that we have done in the ensuing days and months to make sure that we bring reality to equity and inclusion to all of our neighborhoods. Now, you know this, that the challenges that we face as a city didn't begin overnight, and they will not be solved overnight. But we must be resolved and united and pushing forward to get done what needs to get done, to speak the hard truths and be united in addressing these disparities that have existed in communities for way too long. Thank you for your attention, your time today, and now I'll invite Sydney Roberts to the podium.
Thank you, Mayor Lightfoot. Good afternoon. Before I talk about the event surrounding the protests, I want to take a minute to note that the city of Chicago has had civilian oversight since 1974, an oversight system that has evolved and made significant improvements and enhancements to its investigative process throughout the years. Most notably, reforms following the release of the Police Accountability Task Force report that was chaired by Mayor Lightfoot nearly 3 years ago, which led to the creation of the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. Through the recommendations of the task force report and the ordinance passed by City Council in 2016 creating COPA, Chicago's civilian oversight body, we have instituted a robust community engagement program aimed at building trust in the community, particularly amongst our youth, many of whom are marching in those protests. Building trust in civilian oversight, as well as building trust in the department. Inclusive in this trust is the ability of the complainant to receive updates on their investigations, to receive copies of our concluded reports, and the posting of all of our concluded investigations on our website. We have created transparency in the conduct of our investigations, particularly in investigations involving officer-involved shootings through the release of video and audio materials related to those officer-involved shootings. And we have significantly enhanced the training and skills of our investigators who are conducting these investigations, subjecting all of our investigative and legal personnel to a 6-week COPA Academy training. And to enhance the independence of COPA's office, our ordinance establishes a defined budget of 1% of CPD's budget, and its chief administrator can only be removed for cause. And what that means is the chief administrator, currently me, I have the ability to reach decisions based on the facts of the case without worrying about its impact to any elected official or to the superintendent. We can make those facts, and I have the ability, as the mayor mentioned, to call the balls and the strikes. COPA as an agency is responsible for the intake of all complaints against members of the Chicago Police Department, and our investigative jurisdiction is focused on the most egregious of those complaints, specifically excessive force, improper search and seizure, denial of counsel, bias, and sex-based verbal abuse, as well as domestic violence. In addition, COPA has the authority to investigate every single officer-involved shooting. We have the ability to investigate taser discharges that result in serious injury and deaths as a result of police action, including attempts to apprehend. So in response to what we witnessed in Minnesota following the death of Mr. George Floyd and watching the aftermath unfold on a national level, COPA formed a specialized team of investigative personnel, and we began reviewing and responding to those complaints in real time by early Saturday. And as the mayor mentioned, we have seen officers exercising restraint and professionalism during very tense confrontations. But we have also witnessed uses of force that appear excessive. By this morning's count, COPA had received a total of 258 complaints since Friday. Most of these complaints have been related to the protests and have included allegations of excessive force, denial of counsel, improper search and seizure, and verbal abuse, all of which rest squarely within COPA's jurisdiction. We have also referred a host of complaints to Chicago's Bureau of Internal Affairs, alleging failure to activate body-worn camera, the absence or concealment of name tags, unprofessional conduct, and a host of other operational violations. And specific to the videos that we have witnessed that have been circulated on social media and the news outlets, I want to assure you that we are investigating. Unlike many other cities around the country, the breadth of COPA's investigative jurisdiction and the ability to independently conduct thorough investigations is what sets us apart from many other major cities throughout the country. Our civilian oversight authority is to investigate, where many other cities only have the ability to review a completed investigation or audit a completed investigation by their police department. Finally, I want to conclude that COPA must and will conduct fair, independent, objective, and thorough investigations, and we will leave no stone unturned in the conduct of that investigation. And while I appreciate that you may have specific questions to protect against compromise to those investigations, we will not be answering questions about open investigations. But to the community and to the complainants, I want you to know we hear you. We are listening to you. We take your complaints seriously, and we will investigate those complaints. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mayor Lightfoot. Sydney, thank you so much. Let me be clear. There is no contradiction in supporting officers and holding officers accountable. None. God help us if we can't find the courage to publicly condemn police misconduct and excessive force. We will thoroughly investigate any and all complaints of misconduct, and we will also hold officers accountable who are complicit to misconduct. It's always the right time to do the right thing. Ethics is doing what's right when no one's looking. You know, some of the comments I received as I drove here for this press conference is, you can't stand in front of COPA's building, and you certainly can't stand alongside Sidney Roberts, that the cops will be so upset with you that you lose the cops as superintendent. I reject the worldview that you can't support cops and hold them accountable for their misconduct. I believe strongly, and this has been my life's work, I've been a cop all of my adult life, that the best way to represent this star is to ensure that it stands up to its nobility as a profession. And it is a noble profession. But for us leaders not having the courage to hold those accountable who mistreat others, that is not the nobility of this profession. And I stand firm in supporting any and all investigations to seek out and find the truth. And the truth is real justice. God help us if we miss this seminal moment to ensure Chicagoans are proud of their police department and proud of the brave and courageous men and women who risk their lives every day to protect all of us. Thank you, and I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
Happy to take your questions. I guess we start with you, Craig.
One, two, three.
There you
Can
go.
hear me? There we
Yeah.
go. There we go. Number of questions coming in. First of all, just wanted to start with the video that you've seen from Brickyard. Has any action been taken to take those officers off the street, or are they still out there on the street?
Well, again, I don't think it's appropriate for us when there's an ongoing investigation to really comment, but I'm confident that COPA is doing everything it can to identify the officers, and then we'll make a appropriate recommendation.
Do you think those officers should be still on the street during the course of the investigation, though?
Look, I don't want to get ahead, and I'm not the head of COPA. I'm the mayor, and I want COPA to be doing its job, but doing it independently. They have to call balls and strikes on that. Of course, I have my own personal opinion about it, but I'm not going to share it because I don't want to influence what COPA's work is. They have the jurisdiction, they have the mandate, and more importantly, they have my full support to do their job independently, actively, and expeditiously to determine what the facts are so that the superintendent can take the appropriate action.
This is from Becky with Becky Vivia, and this is perhaps you've addressed it already, but the question was regarding the Brickyard incident. If Wright was seen disturbing the peace, would that justify the actions depicted in the video showing officers beating her car with batons and dragging people out?
It's a dangerous thing for us to engage in hypotheticals when we don't know the facts, and I won't do that.
She also asked an unrelated question. This morning, the City Council Committee on Health and Human Relations took up a resolution to create a reparations committee. Do you support reparations for the black community in Chicago? And if so, what shape would they take?
Well, I think today was a subject matter hearing. It's important that we have a discussion about racism, about our history here in the city, and I appreciate that Chairman Sawyer brought this issue forward, and we'll continue those discussions in the coming days.
Heather Sharon from TTW asked, the executive order from your office issued May 29th expired yesterday per Section 9. Does this mean restrictions like closures on the lakefront are now lifted?
No.
Or are you going to be issuing a new?
We are fine-tuning the last few I's and T's on a new order, but the lakefront remains closed.
A couple of questions from Block Club. Some aldermen are calling for a reduction in police funding. David Brown previously said that police are expected to do much in terms of schools, mental health, etc. Would you consider reducing the CPD budget and putting that money elsewhere?
I don't think that's an appropriate action in this time. I think that the people in our neighborhoods who want and have been begging for more police support, in light of what's happened over the last couple days, it would be irresponsible for me to even entertain any idea that we would cut back on our public safety resources in this time.
We'll get to the police chase in a sec. Greg is going to take care of those. But Block Club also asked, do you support the creation of a civilian police accountability council? And why has it taken so long to enact this when Chicago has experienced decades of high-profile cases of police misconduct?
Look, I've been very supportive of police oversight. I've said before, and I believe that we shouldn't fear police oversight. It's worked in other jurisdictions. Unfortunately, the conversations here are stuck on a final few issues, and it's my hope that we will be able to break the logjam and move forward.
Dana Kozlov with CBS 2. Your reaction to pictures on social media showing officers over the past weekend with tape or bands covering their badge numbers and or names, and some lacking body cameras. I know Sydney somewhat addressed it, but do you have any comment or reaction to that?
Number one, they of course should have body cameras, and if they don't, again, that's a complaint that should be filed. That's not acceptable, and that certainly wasn't the norm of the officers that were out there on the street handling the protests. There's been some confusion that I want to clear up. Many officers are wearing a black band over their star that doesn't cover their numbers. That's out of respect for the number of officers that have died in the line of duty in recent years. I had an alderman ask that question and obviously wasn't aware of that history. Clearly, if somebody is trying to black out their identity, that's a whole different issue. But most of the officers who were out there with the black bands, that's over their stars, showing respect for the officers that have been lost.
I realize you wouldn't comment on particular information that might be seen on body cam videos, but are you aware if there are other body camera videos from the Brickyard incident that show what happened, give better perspective?
I don't have that knowledge, but I'm sure that COPA will be pursuing all contemporaneous evidence, both to help contextualize what happened, identify officers, and reach a conclusion in the investigation.
Lisa Donovan with a Trib. Sorry, it's hard to read here in the reflection.
It's a little sunny today, which
yes,
is a good thing.
She asked, Mayor President Obama yesterday called for an end to police practices of using chokeholds to restrain suspects, and said specifically that mayors in the U.S. need to review that police department use of force policy in the wake of the George Floyd case. Can you address that? And maybe you can clarify what the policy is here in Chicago.
Chokeholds are banned in Chicago.
Chokeholds are banned. Are knees allowed to be used on backs or anywhere else if they're not used on the neck? I mean, I don't know what the rules are.
I'll let the superintendent address that, but obviously we know that there are some practices that have been used and like with the officers who were involved in the killing of George Floyd, no police department that I know, certainly no reputable one, allows for officers to put their knees on somebody's neck. That's not standard policy, nor should it be, because we know that will lead to death. Superintendent?
Sure, I'll just highlight that you can call what happened in Minneapolis a lot of things, but you can't call it policing. No police department approves of positional asphyxiation until a person passes away. I've been in this profession for over 33 years. I've never seen that technique used and being called a policing technique of restraint. You handcuff a person that you've taken into custody, you place them in your squad car, and you process them at the local jail. You don't put a knee on their throat and asphyxiate them till they pass away. So no, we will not be approving anything like that type of technique for restraining someone. And I don't know of any other law enforcement agency that does have that technique approved.
Have you taken any action against the officers in the Brickyard video?
We're conducting an investigation through COPA. As soon as they reveal to us the full investigation, will be taking swift action.
But for now, those officers remain on the street working their regular shift.
Until COPA reveals the investigation to us, we'll be taking swift action then.
Thank you.
And Craig, you've asked that question several times. Now let me just be clear. It is not an easy thing to identify officers in a grainy video where people are moving quickly. I know that from my own experience, having run a predecessor of COPA. COPA is doing everything it can to identify those officers, working in conjunction with IAD where necessary, and as soon as those officers are identified, they'll be reported to the superintendent.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
Apparently
You're indulging in the COVID beard.
Yeah.
You know you can get a haircut now.
Mayor, so on a much more serious note than my terrible haircut, we've been, so there were some reasons given for the police chase last night. Some of that he was a suspect in some killings in Harwood Heights and Norridge. We're also hearing that's untrue. What was the reason for the chase? Was it justified, and why wasn't it terminated?
Well, I don't have all the facts yet. I've seen snippets of a video, and so until we know all of the facts, I'm not going to comment, and I know the superintendent won't either. But let me say this. I've been very concerned about police pursuits since I became mayor. The frequency of them, that they cause death, they cause injury, property damage, the whole works. I tasked the chief risk officer for the city last year to start a process in reviewing what the existing pursuit policy was, and to recommend any changes, and then to re-up training around police pursuits. We will be making an announcement shortly about what the new policy is and what the training plan is. Police pursuits are obviously one of the most deadly and dangerous exercises that police officers are engaged in. And we want to make sure that if that is necessary, it's done in very limited circumstances under full direction of a supervisor and done only with marked vehicles with lights and sirens, so that when they're racing through the streets, people know that there's an emergency that's happening. We've had some mistakes that have been made in the past, and we want to make sure that we have the best in practice policy here in Chicago around police pursuits. And I look forward to continuing to work with the superintendent and his leadership team on updating that policy, and we'll be making announcements soon.
Was last night's chase a mistake?
I have no idea, and I can't comment on that. I know obviously the tragic result, and once we understand the magnitude of the facts, we'll be speaking more about it, but that's still an evolving investigation, and I don't want to get ahead of the investigators.
Well, and for the superintendent and for you, the car was able to go from the far south side to the northwest side, back south. I know you don't want to talk about it, but was that...
No, it's not that I don't want to talk about it. What I'm saying to you is it's easy to say something based solely upon video. That's not a full investigation. We have to understand the context. We've got to know why it was initiated, who was involved, what the reasons were, what the instructions were given by the supervisors, were lights and sirens used, were they taking precautions at intersections, and so forth. There's a lot that goes into investigating a pursuit, particularly when it spreads over a lengthy portion of geography. We're not there yet, and I don't want to get ahead of that and somehow prejudice what should be an independent, just the facts investigation. So we're not going to talk about any of the specifics because we want to make sure that we get the facts and we get them quickly, but we get them right. And I don't want anybody who's doing the investigation to be influenced one way or the other by something that I might say in response to questions at a press conference.
Who's investigating? Is COPA
I believe that's
investigating?
a major accident team within CPD. Do you want to comment, Sue?
Right now, major accidents is investigating, and as soon as we get some type of result, even preliminary, we'll be moving in either direction if we find misconduct was appropriate.
Mayor, question from Amanda Vinicky at WTTW, and also for the soup. There are reports that armed vigilantes are patrolling Bridgeport and Armour Square and that the police are not stopping them. Is this happening now, and why is it being allowed?
Well, we're not allowing anyone to take up arms and take matters into their own hands. I've said this, I think, every single day this week. It is absolutely not appropriate for people to take up arms, bats, pipes, whatever, in patrolling neighborhoods. We've seen that end with tragic results across the country, and we're not about to allow that practice to happen here in Chicago. If there's an issue, call 911. I absolutely support neighbors being vigilant as to what's going on their streets and in their blocks, but taking up arms, that leads to chaos. And we're not supporting vigilantism in the city of Chicago under any circumstances.
Question for the superintendent from Amy Jacobson at WIND Radio. Superintendent Brown, earlier this week you seemed to dismiss the importance of the Illinois National Guard. How will they be utilized to keep peace in Chicago?
I want to let you finish asking the question, but that's ridiculous. I did not say that. But go ahead.
And next time there is looting, will you change your tactics? Maybe use rubber bullets on the looters who are destroying our businesses?
It's hard to take that question very serious. There was a person in Dallas who rubber bullets. He lost an eye because of rubber bullets into the crowd. You have to be very careful in how you manage a peaceful protest, and not paint the protesters with a broad brush of violent factions that are in the two distinct, different groups. And we are sworn to an oath to protect First Amendment, the sacred right of First Amendment in this country, and we will do that. But with factions that would mete out violence and/or property damage, we will hold them accountable as well. The rest of the question I just don't take serious. It's ridiculous.
Question from Univision, Mayor, for you. Can we get an update on Hilco and the second demolition? Is there an update you can share, and when will it happen?
Yes, we've been very clear with members of the community now for several weeks. I believe that Hilco announced a week ago that the demolition would happen tomorrow. As far as I know, that is still the plan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.